These days, games are used to having ultra-realistic RTX-on path-traced environments. That's all fine and dandy, but it increases development costs fourfold, the amount of labor threefold, and the amount of GPU usage twofold. So, I'm making a statement. As an industry, we should revert to using just simple shapes, and not just any shape. I'm talking about the rectangle. By the end of this video, you'll see this game go from this to this. So, to start, let's create a new Godot project. I'm using C# instead of GDScript, but you should be able to follow along anyways. To make a rectangle, all we have to do is import this texture, drag it onto the scene, stretch this bad boy out, put another on top, make it slender, paint this blue, and just like that, we're done. Video over. Or not. This still looks like shit. How do we fix this? Well, step 1 to making any game look good are good colors, which is harder than it sounds. You want your colors to blend well together. I highly advise to very rarely, if ever, use neon colors, because then your game will end up looking like a YouTube Kids video, and that's no good. You should, however, make more important things stand out. Returning to our Godot project, I imagine this being on the inside of a volcano, so for the environment, I would use something called analogous colors, which are just colors that are close to or adjacent to each other on the color wheel, such as red, orange, and yellow. For my environment, I'll use a dark burgundy brown for the ground and a warm orange for the lava. I'll also make the lava float up and down to breathe more life into it. Since I want the player to stand out, I'll use a nice blue color so that way the player knows where the player character is at all times. Also make a background, also made from rectangles, and color it the same color as the ground, but brighter, to make it contrast with the player more. Okay, so it looks quite a bit better now, but if I'm being honest, it still looks quite bland. We could add some visual flair in the form of something called post-processing. Post-processing is pretty much just fancy words for adding special effects to the camera to make it look better, such as a bloom to make it glow, or a vignette to darken the edges. This can make your game look much better, but don't overdo it either. Too much bloom and everything is just radiating off the screen. Too little, and it looks like nothing changed. Depending on your engine, you may have to make your own using shaders. In Godot, they've done bloom for us in the world environment now, in the form of glow. If you're in 2D, make sure to set your mode to canvas under background. After that, start messing with the different settings. For me, I only changed the glow values to what you see on screen. It adds a subtle glow to the lava, which is what I wanted. To add a vignette, we need a shader. I found this shader here, which I'll link in the description if you need it. I put it onto a shader material and put the shader on a color rect that I attached to the camera. I adjusted the values until I got something I liked, and that's post-processing done. There are many more effects that you could apply, and I highly recommend to look into the different effects more. But for my game, I don't need much more from post-processing, but even with bloom, the lighting looks pretty bland, and I'm bored of this scene. This is the inside of a volcano, and I imagine light doesn't get in here easily. How can we fix this? Well, first, we need a canvas modulate node to darken the scene. This just applies a tint to everything with the sprite, so doing this does not affect your clear color, and you may need to change that. Anyway, so our environment is dark now, but everything is dark. We need to add lights by adding a point light 2D node to our lava. This node emits a light around an object, which is what we want. This requires a light texture, which I've put the link to the one in Godot's documentation in the description. Mess with the values until you find some you're happy with. In this case, here are my values. This creates a nice vertical darkening with the lighting, but my player seems to get lost in the darkness. To fix this, we can also add a point light to the player, just more subtly, and now it's much easier to see the player in the dark. Now onto the tiniest thing that adds so much to your game, particles. Most games have particles in ways you never even notice because of how tiny of a detail they are, but if they weren't there, you wouldn't notice because of just how much they add to a game. If you know about Willy from Carlson, that entire boss fight is basically just a bunch of really nice particles thrown together into a bunch of different moves, and I guarantee no casual player would ever notice that they're particles. To create particles in Godot, I use the CPU particles nodes, which, if you're using a small amount of particles, it is generally simpler to just use those, but if you have a large amount of particles, it is generally recommended to use the GPU particles, which I've never used, so I can't really tell you much about it, but I'm sure it's great. Anyways, for your particles, you can do whatever you want. For me, I just made it to where there is an ambient ashy particle, but settled a bit more that is definitely warm in here. Before I finish, I went ahead and added some particles to the jump and landing to make it look better and a bit more impactful. To play particles dynamically, like when you jump, you just need to enable the emitting property in your code, like I've done here. Now that I've taught you 4 impactful tips to make a bunch of rectangles go from this to this, I want you to apply these tips onto your games. These tips are simple to implement and also take almost like no time at all. I threw this entire thing together in 2 hours on a Wednesday night. The biggest thing is to just mess with the values and see what fits your game, as I know most games aren't based off the inside of a volcano made entirely out of rectangles, so you will likely need to play around with everything to make it fit well. If you have any other tips you'd like to have, be sure to leave a comment below. I read all the comments and would love to see what you suggest. If you enjoyed the video so far, be sure to subscribe. I might not upload all the time, but when I do, I try my best to deliver. If you're looking for a game engine, watch this old video of mine about the most underrated game engine. You've probably have never even heard of it before.